Hi, I'm Aaron Collins, and you're watching Paranormal Crossings. Yes, it's been a while. We've taken a little bit of a break, but we're back. And we have a lot of exciting things that are getting ready to happen and have happened. One is my guest today, and he is from Oregon City. And he put together the Oregon Ghost Conference. This is the 4th annual Ghost Conference. And he's got a lot of great speakers, a lot of great vendors. And I'm going to let him talk a little more about it. So please welcome Rocky Smith. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So tell us a little bit about yourself. You're from Oregon City.
Yes. Born in Oregon City and have never left. I think I joke about the fact that Oregon City has kind of a curse.
Right.
There's a lot of people that live in Oregon City and have been there their whole lives and never quite escape. The high school in which I teach at Oregon City High School, and my parents went to school there.
Wow.
But of all the staff, I think there's about 100 staff people at the school, and 27 of them graduated from the high school.
Wow.
Yeah, so people kind of stay tied to that town.
Check in and they don't check out.
Right.
So
Right.
Well, good. So now tell us a little bit about some of the history of Oregon City. I mean, for me, it was Oregon City was actually the capital, wasn't it, at one time?
Right.
What time period was that, and when was Oregon City established?
Okay, so Oregon City designated kind of as the end of the Oregon Trail. The city itself was incorporated in 1844, 43, 44. And so as people were coming in on the Oregon Trail, they all kind of settled in Oregon City and then went from there wherever they ended up deciding to build houses. I think people debate where the actual end of the Oregon Trail is.
Mm-hmm.
I have family in the Dalles, and they claim that the Dalles is the end of the Oregon Trail. But what it comes down to is that Oregon City was the territorial capital, and when people came into this area, they had to get their land. The reason they were coming here was to get their free land on the Oregon Trail. And in order to get that free land, they had to go to the capital, and that was Oregon City. And so that doesn't mean that everyone, built their house and stayed in Oregon City. They would then travel from there back to wherever they were going to build their land claim. So it's got a real strong history, and prior to the pioneer history, of course, thousands of years of Native American history.
Right.
And it's a unique place. But it's the history, I think, that draws me to that city and has kept me there ever since I was born. I think it has a small town feel to some degree, different than most of the Portland metro area, but there's just something about the uniqueness of the place, and it kind of is hard to explain to people that aren't from Oregon City or live there, but so I do my best to try to bring people out there, and the Ghost Conference is actually one of the ways I've been able to try to do that.
Right. And how did you So you're an art teacher.
Yeah.
For high school.
Yeah.
And you're also Oregon City Commissioner.
Right.
And you're also doing the Northwest Ghost Tours.
Right.
Okay. Do you have time to sleep?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. So no, I try to keep myself busy. I'm always, doing some sort of a project, but I think that I'm best when I'm busy.
Right.
But a lot of those things kind of grew into each other. I think when I was growing up in Oregon City, I had a strong interest in the history. Not a strong history focus, but like in terms of a broad history, but local history. I very much am interested in Oregon history and Oregon City history. So in high school, I started working at the end of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center in Oregon City. Worked through a couple years in that building when it first opened. And that building is built right on the Abernathy Green, which is the old end of the Oregon Trail.
Okay.
It's also in the floodplain, so in 1996 was under an amazing amount of water. When I left my job there, I started working for the city, and I wanted to work at Parks and Rec because I knew I was going to go into teaching, but I still had that interest in history, and the city had the Ermatinger House. The Ermatinger House is a house in Oregon City that actually predates the McLaughlin House. The McLaughlin House about 1845, 46, and the date on the Ermatinger House has always been 1845. We think actually the house is about 1843. We're doing some restoration right now of the house and kind of doing some more research. So I worked in that house in high school, and because the city didn't really have anyone to kind of operate the house for a while, and so they hired me doing Parks and Rec, but also had me, do tours through the house. And that was really kind of my first experience with the paranormal, I guess, in that house. The house had always been rumored to be haunted, but wasn't quite sure if I believed in ghosts, wasn't quite sure what I would do if I had an experience. And so working in that house for the first couple months was very interesting because I had to, most of the time I was in the house completely by myself. And so I would have to kind of just, hang out in the house, wait for people to come by, and that usually didn't happen, and things would happen in the house that I couldn't explain.
What are some of the things that happened?
Well, I will tell you, the first day, kind of the processing, that first day working in the house. It was like, okay, do I believe in ghosts? I'm not sure, but I'm now going to be working in this haunted house, and I was handed the keys by my boss at the time, and basically figured that my boss would show me the house, and was kind of told, well, we don't really go into the house much, so here's here's the keys. Kind of good luck.
That's the first clue.
So I it's a block. It's right across the street from the Carnegie Center or the library in Oregon City, where the main office was, and so. I only had to walk a block across the street to get into the house, and I had the keys, and I was just thinking to myself, what am I going to do if I get into this house and there's, just these things happening, and I don't really know I wasn't really prepared for it, I don't think, and I kind of was trying to process that as I walked across the street in a very short time, and so when I got to the porch, I basically said to the house, I basically figured that if there was spirits in the house or ghosts, that I was going to be safe by just addressing them and saying, this is who I am and this is why I'm here. Because I figured just simply that it was their house. And, I was just visiting. I think it was kind of a long shot. I mean, even at the time, I was questioning myself doing that. But I'm glad I did it, because as soon as I unlocked the door just opened by itself. And I went into the house, and I spent, probably the first month in the house just kind of very quiet. Didn't really feel like it was a place that was active in terms of the paranormal, but definitely just a peaceful place.
Now, why is it Francis Ermatinger?
Yeah, now Francis is a male. Francis, so people kind of get confused sometimes thinking it's a female Francis or Ermatinger. Francis Ermatinger worked for the Hudson Bay Company. So you have the Hudson Bay Company centered in Oregon City in the 1840s, or up into the 1840s, and McLaughlin is stationed at Fort Vancouver. He is coming into Oregon City and really wanting to build a Hudson Bay Company store in Oregon City. And he ends up building a house for Francis Ermatinger. And the Ermatinger house built also on the lower level of the city, like the McLaughlin house. He builds the house really just out of scrap wood from the mill and from various places around town. And, and there was even some diary entries from when the house was built saying, this house surely won't stand. At that time period. And so, the house went through multiple floods in its history. It went through 2 moves around town.
Now, this was moved uphill.
Moved uphill. Moved from the downtown to kind of the mid-level of the city in the early 1900s, and then moved to its current location in about 1986. So Ermatinger, basically didn't live in the house very long. He was just living in the house so that they could get the Hudson Bay Company store started in Oregon City. But at the same time, McLaughlin was really getting forced out of the Hudson Bay Company. And part of that was McLaughlin's kind of willingness to help the pioneers, willingness to help these Americans that were coming in broke and sometimes near death after this journey getting here, broke, not having any money to get homes built. And John McLaughlin helped these people. And that didn't go over too well with the Hudson Bay Company, who was really seeing this mission of McLaughlin to be securing this area for the British. So he was forced out of the Hudson Bay Company about 1845. So that's when you see him build his house in Oregon City and really focus on building the town.
Which is a very large house.
Yeah.
And now so the Ermatinger house was built by Dr. John McLaughlin.
Right.
And then, but there's two things that really are significant with that house that stands out in my mind. Number one, the flat top roof.
Flat roof.
Is
Yep.
that one of the first or the only house that was built with the flat top roof?
Yeah, I don't know if it was the first. So right now there's a couple of other houses in Oregon that predate the Ermatinger house, but we're talking, one of the first couple houses in the state.
Wow.
And that was the key component of the house that made it stand out. Is so awkward. At least it does for us today. But it was built with a flat roof. And
do you know what the reasoning was behind that, or?
I don't honestly know. I mean, I think the lack of knowledge probably of the Pacific Northwest and just building houses in that style. They built that house, and the flat roof didn't stay very long, obviously. They realized that wasn't going to work, and so they built an angled roof onto the house soon after the house was built. And I think that's very interesting because when the McLaughlin house was built in 1845, it's built with an angled roof. So in the restoration of the house in 1986, there was kind of this real interest in taking that angled roof back off, just because we wanted it, and even today, we want people to see that house the way it was built.
Right.
And so, does it have a flat roof? Well, from the street, it looks like it has a flat roof. But there's actually kind of an angle to the roof that's hidden so that it still appears to be flat like it was originally, but also could deal with the drainage and the rain and all that.
Well, and then the second thing, which is very important for Portland's history, which is
Yes.
which took place in the house, which is the coin toss.
Right.
And who is the coin toss with, and what were the choices? I believe it was Portland, and it was going to be either Portland or Boston.
Right.
And it was all based on a coin toss, which just fascinates me.
So I think the most incredible thing about the coin toss stories, I think everyone knows that story. Everyone knows, most of local Portlandiers, or what do we call people from Portland? But I think that Oregonians know that story. I think that most people know that story. The problem is no one knows where it took place. And you never hear that part of the story. So, even when I talk to elementary school kids and I say, do you know how Portland got its name? And they will say that, yeah, it was a flip of a coin. And so living in Oregon City, I think what people forget is that Portland is the suburb. Portland is the suburb of a big city called Oregon City. And so none of these other towns existed. Oregon City was the center point for everything on the western part of the United States. So the naming of the city of Portland, happens before we have really any state government, and kind of a loose territorial government. So you have these buildings houses that acted like government buildings, because people were making those decisions in their living rooms, in their homes, and the research always pointed to the Ermatinger house. We've never found a diary entry specifically that says this is where it took place, and we're working on it. I think we have some leads into where we might actually be able to fully prove this. But when we were starting to restore the house, because the house has been kind of falling apart, and so the last probably the last 10 years I've been working on trying to get the money through the city to restore the house. So that's in the process right now. And in doing that, we really wanted to know that crucial piece of history, because I think that's one of the reasons the house is so important.
Right.
So I kind of went on an expedition to the Oregon Historical Society and was asking questions about the coin toss. They have a coin in their front lobby that they say is the coin.
The coin.
Whether or not it is, I don't know.
Now, was
they
Francis
claim it is.
Ermatinger part of that flip, or
No,
was
so
this after?
so the coin toss was between Asa Lovejoy, Francis Pettygrove. Now, both Asa Lovejoy and Francis Pettygrove were residents of Oregon City. They went to church, and their families were there. And so they owned this land downriver from Oregon City that they were working on building their own town, cutting down all the trees and building a city, and people started calling it Stumptown because of all the lack of trees, and really trying to say, well, we need to name this place. And these homes were used as dinner parties. The Francis Ermatinger house was only owned by him for a fairly short time. There was a period of time after he left that the Wilson family owned the house, and at some point into, I think about the 1860s, it becomes a rooming house. So some references about the coin toss talk about the Wilsons. So that's the one link that we have to the Ermatinger house. I think that Ermatinger was either on his way out, or I don't know. I don't know if he would have been there at the time or not. But the story goes that there was a coin. They flipped the coin 3 times, and that Pettygrove won 2 out of the 3 coin tosses, and so that was the city of Portland being named instead of Boston. Because Pettygrove was from Portland, Maine. Asa was from Boston. So everything at the Historical Society and everything that I've researched, everyone says, well, it happened in a house in Oregon City. And
But
sometimes they won't say specifically what house, but when you narrow it down, there's only so many houses in Oregon City that existed at that time. And then you have this connection of the Wilsons, and the Wilsons, we believe there's something in a diary that references from the Wilsons when they sold the house about the coin toss. So that's one of the things that we're trying to find. But you can narrow it down to 1 or 2 houses in Oregon City if that's where it happened. So we hope we can find some really good proof. But in general knowledge, that's what people say.
It's funny because I first went on the tour in 1995.
Right.
And I think I originally told you it was 93 or 94, but I think it was looking back, it was 95 is when I went.
I've had several conversations since then about the time frame, so I'm trying to remember exactly, because I think I was hired, I don't know, it was right around that time, so maybe 95, 96.
I always thought it was strange that the person at the time doing the tours had told us that this is the house that they did the coin toss. In fact, this is the room. She was specific to the room.
Right.
And
which room did she?
I think it's thinking about it going in. It's either the first one on the left or the first one on the right. I can't remember. One of those two. Is it the left?
That's what we say. So hopefully that's
okay. Good. Good. But I thought something that's so significant to Portland's history.
Right.
Why aren't we hearing more about this house, this location? And I only stumbled on this because I was looking for places to visit that were supposedly haunted or whatever. And I was already in Oregon City, went through the John McLaughlin house. The curator there said, oh, you got to go to the Ermatinger house. Before that, I'd never even heard about it.
Well, I think part of it is the house was lost. I mean, the house was lost in Oregon City for probably up until the 1970s or 80s. So it was a house that had been moved, a house that had been built upon, changed. and it was a lady in Oregon City named Ruth Powers who is responsible for saving a lot of Oregon City's historic homes. Did the research and realized what it was, realized what this house was and where it was originally in all of its history, and brought it back. And so they had it moved up the hill to where it is now. When she passed away, the house was then deeded to the city.
Wow.
So, it's really only been probably since the 80s that people even knew that the house still existed. And even since then, it's been a small group of volunteers slowly, trying to learn the history, slowly trying to get people into the house. The house is in the Parks Department in Oregon City, which has a lot of priorities. So on top of trying to fund parks and staffing and a museum house is not one of those other things that really comes to the top of the list. And so it's been really hard to keep the maintenance of the house up, and it's been very hard to keep the house staffed with volunteers because of that. And so I think that's part of why people don't know this story. I think we're trying to use the momentum that we're getting with the restoration of the house and the interest of the house to build a friends group and actually start getting that story out there more.
Now, is the restoration, is that your insistence and
Partly,
persistence?
yeah. I mean,
Because really, I mean, your I don't want to say fascinating, your passion for the Ermitinger house
it's very strong.
is very strong.
Yes.
And I realized that when we spoke the first time.
Yes.
And as well as mine for a different reason. And because I had a connection there that was paranormal.
Right.
And so really that launched into you, one of the reasons, small reason, why you wanted to be on the city council or city commissioner, and try to get things changed.
There was a lot. There was a lot of reasons. My dad is a retired police officer in Oregon City, and in about 2000, I ran in 2008 for the city commission. Prior to 2008, we were short about 10 police officers in the city, and that was a major concern. The fact that we had ordinances and policies that require homeowners of historic homes to upkeep their houses, and that we owned the oldest house or one of the oldest houses in the state and weren't doing that, I think that bothered me. Building a library, which we've been trying to do for 100 years. The Willamette Falls project, the history of the city, which I've referenced so many times, the closure of a mill in a mill town, and how that's going to change the history of and the future of the city. The entire history of the West Coast is centered on that falls site, and now we have an ability to try to redevelop that site. So I mean, there was probably about 10 other things. There's so many things going on in Oregon City, and it was time, at that time in 2008 to really run for city commission, and the house was one piece of it. Since 2008, we have been working very hard. The city commission actually took that as a top priority, a really strong priority, and we've gotten. The house got put on the endangered list, basically, for the top, heritage sites or top heritage buildings that were needing to be preserved, that were at risk, and so that put a lot of focus on the house. And so we've gotten grants through a whole bunch of different sources. So the city's putting in close to $500,000 to finish this house.
That's awesome.
But it's important, and I think people say, well, you could knock the house down and rebuild it for $100,000 or $200,000. Like, well, you obviously don't understand.
No.
Why that's not okay.
Yeah.
So yes, it is expensive, and it's more expensive the more you let a house kind of fall apart. It's that upkeep that's very important, but once it's gone, it's gone, and so it's an expense that's there. But what's what's too much to save
Right.
history, and save an important story like the naming of the city of Portland and things like that. So we hope the house will be finished and open sometime this summer.
Wonderful. I can't wait to
But
go
it's
back.
been a long process, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you know, it's ironic because since I've been in the paranormal field, I've learned more history about Portland and Oregon itself than I had known before. And I've been here for about 30 years. And it's really taking me to a lot of different historical sites, some that people don't even know about,
Right.
that was amazing, even part of the Barlow Trail. Some buildings that are still standing up on Mount Hood, that area.
Right.
Just incredible. And then just, if we look within our own city, I mean, just Oregon City alone, just the historical homes and everything that's happened there. I mean, something as significant as the
Right.
coin toss, it sounds silly, but to me, I mean, it's just a very significant thing that's happened, and I mean, people should know about it.
Yeah.
We should have people flooding, and no pun intended, but flooding, to Oregon City to see these historical homes. The Dr. John McLaughlin House,
Right.
the Stevenson Crawford House, which is next door to the Ermitinger House, and then the Barclay House, which
Barclay
is
House.
next to McLaughlin and such. And so I think the more, I think it's great what you're doing, and I admire you for taking a stand, because really it takes one person. One person to stand up and just say, I'm going to do something about it. And you should be commended for that. I appreciate it.
I'm surprised. It's been, like I said, it's been probably a 15-year process.
Oh, I bet.
And in parts of my mind, I never thought it would happen. And so it's also opened up a big fear.
I bet.
Both on my part and on some of our city staff part, because now we're getting to the part that the point that the house is done,
Yeah.
or getting close to done, and now what? And so the real challenge now is, how do we make sure we can create a friends group to keep the house going,
Yeah.
to make sure that we can raise the funds to maintain the house and keep care of it, so it
Yeah.
doesn't get into the situation it was. And so
I think it's great.
That's a big process.
So would you say that your experiences in the Ermitinger House early on,
Yeah.
that sparked your interest in the paranormal, or really your I guess interest, but fascination with the paranormal?
The Ermitinger House is centered on everything about why I'm involved in the paranormal in any way. My real interest was always history. So people coming into the house wanting to know the stories of the ghost stories of the house, or the ghost stories of the city, it just kind of happened. And I think just my natural interest as a teacher to be able to want to tell people these stories. And so I knew the history background. I didn't know a lot of the ghost stories and the legends and the myths and the folklore, and I like to separate all those, because I think it's all part of this full picture of what really happened. So I found that my high school students, I'd have students that would go on tours, or I would have people come to the museum or something and ask me questions, and they didn't find the same pioneer history exciting. I think there was in the last 10 years or so, it seems that we're like, okay, well, everyone's talked about the pioneer thing. What else does Oregon City have?
Right.
What else are we not talking about? Museums, where you go into a museum where there's artifacts and things, it's not the world that we live in anymore, where you're going to keep, a building like that sustainable. People want to experience something. They want to be able to connect it to their lives. And so sharing the paranormal stories was something I found really got my students interested in the history. So it was partly my own experiences in the house, and this dialogue that I was seeing happening in the house and also in the community about all of these different heritage sites and the things that people were experiencing but not talking about.
Right.
And I would say I've been doing the tours in Oregon City for about 9 years, and since then, people are a lot more open about talking about the experiences they have in their buildings. It's very rare that I'm not doing a tour on Main Street in Oregon City or in the McLaughlin neighborhood where someone doesn't come out of their business or their store or their house to come tell me another story about what they've experienced. So it's constantly changing. And so it wasn't so much, the interest in ghost stories is the fact that these people were sharing these stories and this history and how I could make the connections between the two that really drew me into it. And so, the Ermatinger House led to the tours, and the tours led to the Ghost Conference, which is, what we're working on now. And I think someone posted today we're 17 days away.
Yeah, it's
that
getting
frightened me a little bit.
Scared me too. I'm speaking at it, so I'm like, what?
So I'm like, it's 17 days away, but I really need about 30 or 40 days to get everything done. So there'll be some late nights, but.
Well, tell us about the Ghost Conference.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't attend last year, but it's when I first was starting Paranormal Crossings, and so I had asked one of the people that's helping you out if we could come and film, and she said, well, I need to talk to Rocky and make sure that that's okay. And so anyways, lack of communication, and plus doing the show, it didn't happen then, but then she approached me about speaking this year. And so that really got me excited.
I'm glad she did.
Me too, and I appreciate you allowing me to be there and do some of the other things that I'm going to be doing at the conference. So tell us, walk us through the 3-day weekend. What does it look like? And,
boy, it's really exciting. We're moving to a new location. So the first 3 years, we were at the Pioneer Community Center in Oregon City, which is a city-owned building that just happens to be built right across the street from the Ermatinger House. And so there was a connection there for that building.
Sure.
The Pioneer Center, where we've held it at the last 2 years, or the last 3 years, is just too small. We outgrew the building. And my fear was that, we were going to outgrow the city. And there's not very many places in Oregon City to host a big event. So my hope was to use the old high school, the old Jackson campus, which is the old high school that I went to school as a student, and my high school that I started my job teaching. And we've since moved up the hill into a new building, but the old high school that was built in the 1930s is partly used for different community programs. There are parts of the buildings that aren't used at all anymore. And then the second floor, which is rumored to be the most haunted, which is a building that I've had experiences in, is where we're going to have the conference. So
are they saying what it's haunted by, or who it's haunted by?
Well, that's the thing. I put this when I first announced that we were going to have the conference at the high school, and I mentioned that the building was haunted. There was this whole reaction saying, "What, are you crazy? I went to school there. I never had anything happen." And so there was this big outrage of people that said, "Well, that building's not haunted." And I'm like, "Well, people have had experiences there. I've had experiences there. I think the real question is, okay, if the building's haunted, what is haunting it?" And at least in the last decade, there's been this kind of story created by students. And it's completely bogus as far as I can tell. But students talk about, that there was a story of a girl who hung herself in the theater in that building, and that's part of it. They've even given her a name. I think they call her Mabel. So this story has gone on and on. Now, as a student there, I've lived in Oregon City my whole life, went to school, taught there, never heard that story, ever. I had heard stories of a teacher on the second floor that people would see, fingerprints on the chalkboard that would disappear or come back, those kind of things. Chairs falling off the tables and desks, and voices, people hearing voices. There was times where I was in that building by myself or in particular halls where I would hear someone call my name. And it was one instance where I left my keys on a counter. I was talking to a secretary. We were the only two people in the building. And I went into her office, and I'm absent-minded, and I set things down. And so I said, left, and I didn't know I left my keys on the counter. So I walked down the hallway in the dark and out towards my room, and I heard someone say, "Rocky," So I turned around and looked down the hallway. There was nobody in the hallway at all. So I just assumed that must be, coming from the office where I just left. So I walked back into the office, into the doorway, and saw my keys on the counter, and thanked the secretary in there for calling me back to get my keys. And she said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, didn't you just call me back to get my keys?" And she said, "No, in fact, I didn't even know your keys were there."
Wow.
So that happened, and I had some students that told stories about the same kind of experience. I had friends that worked as custodians that would talk about hearing that.
Wow.
And one of which I'd never told that story to. I said, "Well, okay, where in the building did you have this happen?" And she took me there, and it was the same hallway that I had my experience.
Wow. Just
So
their
there
names
are-
being called?
Yeah, just someone calling your name.
Wow.
And so, there are things that happen there. So I think people think that since I'm having a ghost conference and I'm promoting each of the sites that we're at as being haunted, they think that I chose those sites because they're haunted, and I really didn't.
You
I
needed the
chose
space.
those sites because that's where I could do the conference, and
Right.
it just so happens there's stories. So I'm not by any means saying that the old Jackson campus is the most haunted place in the city,
Right.
because it definitely isn't. And that's not why we're using the building. We're using the building because it's a huge space, and it's centralized to all the other haunted places that we're going to be talking about throughout the weekend. So we have a lot of meet and greet events. We're going to have kind of a pizza party like the first night as kind of a preview event for people to come see the booths. And we have the authors panel that first night that you're going to host. And then throughout Saturday, a lot of speakers, lots of great speakers from all over. We have people coming from Utah. Nicole Strickland
San
is
Diego.
coming from San Diego.
Yes, I'm excited.
From the Queen Mary. So we have classes. We have a ghost tour and an investigation each night that people can go to. We have a comedy show on Friday night, and a gallery reading on Saturday night. A pancake breakfast on Sunday.
Wow.
I mean, there's tons of events, and
full
so we're
weekend.
adding a lot more events than we even had last year. And I was just doing a radio thing the other day talking about the conference, and he's like, I was looking on your schedule, and he says, the host said, well, how you're really running these people through? And I said, well, yeah, because the thing is, I want to cram as much as I can in there. I want people to be able to experience as many things, and I'm turning people away. I'm turning people away that want to come speak, and so trying to get as many different opportunities in a 3-day weekend. There's only so much time you can have, and you get short of doing it a week-long conference. It's very hard to do that. So it's a lot of late nights. We go basically from 8:30 in the morning till 2 in the morning with events.
That's awesome.
And so a little bit of sleeping time,
Right.
but not much.
And so people can find out more about the Ghost Conference by going to the website.
Yes.
And the website would be?
It's OregonGhostConference.com.
Okay, and we'll show that on the screen as well. And then you also kind of partnered with a hotel for those that are coming from out of town, and that is?
The River Shore Hotel in Oregon City, and there's discounted rates for people that are coming into town through the River Shore, and it's haunted too.
Why, I was telling you, the TripAdvisor,
Yes.
somebody had mentioned that they had stayed there and named all the paranormal experiences that they had in this hotel, and they said, and in no way did I feel like it was negative.
Right.
But I thought, oh my gosh, that is just a brilliant way to advertise, especially to stay there for the Ghost Conference, because people are there obviously for paranormal, and people that are fascinated by the paranormal are wanting to experience different paranormal experiences, and so maybe they'll have one. So.
Yeah, the hotel.
But I think it's funny that when you were looking for hotels and stuff, and trying to book a room for yourself because you like to to go and just be a part of all that.
Right.
They want to put you in the most haunted rooms and all you want to do is sleep.
Right. Well, I didn't see how much time we have, but the story was basically the one year we went to the conference, and so I always stay at the hotel room. I always stay at the hotel because I want to be there with all the people coming in for the conference. So they usually think they're doing me a favor by giving me a haunted room, and they usually they usually say, "Oh yeah, you're going to really like this room," and I'm like, "Well, why?" And they're like, "Well, something happened up there." And I'm like, I just want to sleep.
Right.
I'm doing a ghost conference. Yes, I understand that you think I really want to go investigate this haunted room in the middle of the night, but I'm coming back at like 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning, and then I have to do the conference at 8, so I want to sleep.
Right.
So the one day we went at the River Shore Hotel, and I was checking in, and they kind of gave me that thing. She's like, "Oh yeah, here, you're going to really like this room." I said, seriously, I just want... So I go up to the hotel room, and at first I asked, "Well, what happened? What happened in this room?" And she wouldn't say anything. And so I went up to the hotel room, and I checked in and, went into the room, and it was just a heavy room. When you go into a place that you just feel that something's wrong. So it wasn't anything horrifying. It was just, this is a very heavy room emotionally to go into, and like I said, I was really tired, so I didn't really think much about it. But when I went into the restroom, that's where it was the worst, I felt. And so the next morning, I said, "You got to tell me what happened in this room." And they didn't say much for a while, but eventually said that someone had died in the bed in this room.
Wow.
And I was like, "No, this is not something, I want to hear after
Right. Better after than before, though.
Right. So what I ended up finding out, I really questioned that, because I was thinking to myself, that's not where I was feeling the energy.
Sure.
It was the bathroom, and it turns out this is a person who had taken too many pills.
Oh.
And I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. This
Yeah.
is not a real tragic scene, really. It was someone that was not doing well themselves, and they, if they would have taken pills, probably was in the bathroom when they were doing that, and then just laid down, and
Wow.
so I think that was really what happened. But it's people joke about places being haunted or not haunted, or have that conversation, but if you think about it, every building
Right.
There's not many places where someone hasn't passed away.
Sure.
There's not many places where there isn't some energy that's left, and some, feeling that you might get going into these places. So it's, does that mean it's haunted? Not necessarily.
No.
But I think the interesting thing about that hotel itself is mainly just the location. It's,
Right. And it's right there on the Willamette River.
Right, and
Yeah.
again, we didn't choose it because it's a haunted hotel. We
Sure.
chose it because it's the only hotel in the city.
Right.
But it's on an area that was the end of the Oregon Trail, Abernathy Green. It was in an area that was very near a lot of the Native American villages that were first started up, the Clackamas Indians, and so it's really all of Oregon City that has these
Right.
issues, not just the buildings themselves. I think the ghosts and the paranormal kind of transcend the buildings. It's
Right.
the buildings are just there.
Well, tell us about the first ghost conference. How did that go, and how did it form into, okay, now it's 4 years later, and how does that feel for you? And the other question that I had, which I was about to ask you before, was when you get recognized, are you recognized as a teacher, city
a good
commissioner,
question.
or the ghost guy?
That's a very good question. Let me talk about that first. You're going to
Sure.
have to remind me what the first question was.
Okay.
So what's really funny is I do these tours. I do the walking tours in Oregon City, usually July through October.
Mm-hmm.
So typically on a Friday, Saturday night in the summer, all the way through Halloween, I'm doing these tours. And I had William Becker for a while that was helping me do tours, and he would do a lot of the downtown tours, and I would do the McLaughlin tours. And partly because the McLaughlin neighborhood is a little quieter than downtown. Mm-hmm. Because what I found is as I was walking down the street, every car that would go by would say, "Hey, Rocky! Rocky!" It
That's
was
awesome.
like, so it was crazy. And usually it was students,
Right.
or, whoever.
Right.
But it was... Something that, so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it's because of teacher or because of the ghost tours or the city connection, but it's probably a combination of all.
Probably
those.
all of them, yeah.
So yeah, being in Oregon City that long, people know you, and I said I have about 300 students a year for 14 years. That's a lot of people.
Quite a
and
few
their
people
families.
and their families.
And
Yes.
they stay in Oregon City. So so it's a little bit of everything. But back to the conference.
Yes.
So it was really the ghost tours that kind of allowed me to start meeting different paranormal groups and found that there was a couple different paranormal events that were going on. One was called, I think, the Rose City. I don't know if I can remember. I think Rose City Paracon. And then there was another event called the Mount Hood Ghost Conference. Michael Jones did for a couple years with Catherine, and so they did those for a couple years, and they were great events. Small, but really a great way to mingle with different paranormal groups, and so I attended those just to promote the tours and to talk about Oregon City. My friend William that helped with the tours for a while, and he said, I talked to him. I said, I do different events in Oregon City. I've planned haunted houses. I've planned festivals and parades and all this stuff. I really think it'd be cool to do a ghost conference. And I didn't have any other thought than to have it in Oregon City. It was this has to happen here.
Yeah.
Not only because it's a centerpiece for the state's history, but everything. It's like we have all the locations we could talk about. But my plate is extremely full. And it's always been full. And so I have to kind of segment my day planning various different things. But my friend said, no, this is really something you need to do. And so with his help, thankfully, we started it. So the first Ghost Conference 2012. And really wanted to make it a bigger thing. I wanted to make it something that drew in the public, because I found that a lot of the other paranormal events were those core same paranormal groups, but they weren't engaging new people too much. They might be promoted and open to the public, but it didn't bring them in. It didn't bring in people from the community. And I don't know whether that was promotion or what, but that was kind of really what I wanted to focus on, is to try to blend the general public into this paranormal world, to have those discussions about history and about whether or not you believe in this at all. I mean, that's a good discussion to have. I think
definitely.
I think this is a good event for skeptics to come to and really question these kind of things, because I still believe I'm very skeptic. I believe all my own ghost stories. I don't believe anyone else's. So I think that's part of why I really wanted to do it, and I think tourism too. I mean, I'll be honest. I think sometimes people say, well, you're just doing, ghost tours and to make money. But truthfully, it is bringing people into the city, and it does do that. I'm very clear about what I'm telling. I think anyone that's gone on my tour appreciates the fact that I don't try to take a non-story and make it into something.
Right.
I'm very careful about when I talk about a story, and whether it's a myth or a piece of folklore, or if this is something that I've really experienced. I think you have to be honest in telling people that.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I'm very specific on how I do my tours. I do them in period dress with a lantern. I don't wear a t-shirt like this. I wear a t-shirt like this for the Ghost Conference because we're going from one event to another.
Right.
But when I'm doing my regular tours, I'm really paying respect to those places and the spirits that I'm talking to or sharing their story. I think that's crucial. I don't try to make it into a freak show. I don't try to antagonize or anything. I just try to tell the story. And so even on this last couple bus tours, they gave me a megaphone to use, and I was like, I don't want to use that,
Right.
because that just doesn't feel right.
Were you running school buses or?
We rented worked with Portland PDX double decker, which is a double decker bus in Portland.
Yeah.
Was awesome. Was
That
very
is so cool.
So I did 2 bus tours, one on Friday, February 13th, and then Friday, March 13th. There was those two
Awesome.
2 nights, so that was great. But yeah, I was like, I'm not going to hold a megaphone, and talk. I did the first tour because I was getting sick and my voice was going. But, when you're standing in front of a cemetery or historic house, it doesn't work.
Right.
A loudspeaker doesn't work. You really just need to tell the story, and you need to be respectful of that time. And so, balancing that with a tourism kind of draw that brings people in, and we're on the verge, I think, of really seeing Oregon City become a real tourism destination, which it always has been to a small part, but with the focus on the Willamette Falls.
Oh my gosh, beautiful.
In the next 10 or 20 years, we could see a real change to that site and what that happens in terms of tourism.
Well, and really history is so important for us to know and to learn about. And, I have kids, and that's one of the things that I find fascinating, or I found fascinating with doing paranormal investigations. You're not going to find ghosts, you're going to disprove.
Right.
And I go in as a skeptic.
Right.
I've had my own experiences throughout my entire life, and but I don't listen to everyone's stories and think, okay, well then yes, it's got to be Aunt B that's haunting her her old bedroom. I go in and okay, there's got to be a logical explanation first. But then again, along with some of the investigations we've done is learning the history. Okay, so ask a lot of questions. What is the history of the house? Okay, before it was a house, what about this land? Who owned this land? Was there a battle on this land? Was there this or that? And so there's so much to it, and you're really bringing living history to life, really to life with these tours. And paranormal, a lot of people are not into wanting to hear about ghosts and things like that. They think it's all negative, and really it's not all negative. It's a misconception. It'd be like saying, well, every preacher's a crook. That's not true, because I'm a minister, and I've been in ministry for about 10 years. And so, but the thing with the whole ghost thing is, people get scared, because of the horror movies and things like that. But you know what? Do some research, and a lot of people, they really up till about 10 years ago, people really didn't talk too much about the paranormal, at least not in public. Like this wouldn't have happened 10 years ago, or 10 plus years ago. But really, there's some certain shows that have come out that have really given the boost to the whole paranormal community, if you will. And now everybody wants to be a paranormal investigator, which is funny. Because really at the time that I went on the tour at the Ermitinger House, I wanted to do an investigation there as well, because of things that happened right before my eyes and my ears. It was insane. And so I had to go back and do this, and so, which I never did, mind you, but really that's what really stemmed my fascination and curiosity even further with the paranormal. And so
the tricky part has been, when you're doing tours, people come up to the tour and they go on a ghost tour, they expect something to happen, right, and it's like, well, it doesn't work that way.
They don't act out on cue.
But at the same time, things do happen on the tours. And so when I'm going through a tour, I'm constantly going back and forth between keeping an open mind and keeping a closed mind, because something will happen and everyone in the tour goes, "Ooh, what's that?" And I'm like, a branch fell out of the tree.
My stomach growled.
It's really nothing. So I have to counteract that by downplaying things, and then I also have to kind of keep tabs of the things that I notice out of the corner of my eye. And I don't usually ever tell the group when I'm having an experience on the tour, because I don't want to taint their opinion on whether or not I don't want to create things.
Tell us one thing that's happened to you that's very significant or compelling that's happened on one of the tours.
Well, and this has been a very big debate over the years. Streetlights, not just streetlights, but and there's certain streetlights that shut themselves off when they get hot and whatever, and so a lot of people will talk about that. But there were various times where streetlights go off right when I walk by them with a tour group. They'll be on and they'll go off, or I'll talk to them and they'll go off, or I'll point at something across the 5 blocks away and that light will go off. And not just street lights that are prone to shutting off, but lights on buildings, other things. I've noticed that a lot.
You must bring a lot of energy with you.
Yeah, so it could be, and I'm not saying it's a ghost thing, it could be just the energy, I don't know. That's one thing that's happened a lot. I do see shadows out of the corner of my eyes. I do see figures during the tours and stuff, and I usually don't say anything during the tours to that, but balancing that is really tricky, because you don't want to create things, but you also know that there are things happening. And I think the point that you talked about with these important places, I really feel that, well, one of the things I say is these are not haunted places. I kind of go back and forth, but in my tours I say these are not haunted places. These are historic places where history continues to repeat itself.
Oh, I love that.
And the other thing I say is that it's really important. The one reason I do the tours is that I think people need to be tourists in their own backyard. I think when you drive through Oregon City or through Gresham or through Portland, you should know what you're driving past. You should understand the history of it. And if you've lived there your whole life and you don't know that history, I think it's sad. And I think to know it and to respect that history and be able to appreciate it, I think is a real important part of it.
Right. Yeah. So for people that are interested, and give the website for the Ghost Conference again, and then a little how do we find out more about the Northwest Ghost Tours?
Okay, so the website is OregonGhostConference.com. That's for the big event coming up in April.
And what is the admission for that, by the way?
The admission's free.
It is free?
Yeah.
Ooh, all right.
So general admission for speakers and panels listening to that is free. There's tickets for the special events, tours, classes, and that'll be hopefully online. People can start buying tickets next week.
Wonderful.
And then the ghost tours, I usually run after July 4th holiday, so that next week, July through Halloween night, and it's northwestghosttours.com.
Northwest Ghost, it's not NW, it's
well, it's either one. I own both. So NW Ghost Tours, it's just harder to say that. So Northwest Ghost Tours or NW Ghost Tours,
Rocky, it's been a pleasure,
Yeah.
and I really appreciate you coming out and talking to us more about the conference and your experiences in Oregon City. And again, I commend you for all the things that you're doing, and for a guy who never sleeps, you look pretty decent.
Right.
So.
Well, I sleep a little bit.
Okay, just a wink every now and then.
Every time the camera went off of me, I was
taking
a nap.
I caught the snoring every now and then. So thanks
you so
again.
much.
I really appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And so if you want to learn more about the Ghost Conference and the Northwest Ghost Tours or the walking tours, then we'll put that on the screen for you. Thank you again for joining us for Paranormal Crossings.